Advertising has changed over the decades. Next month, you may have the beginning of the new Facebook. In 1995, I moved into the advertising industry, and you know, you're suddenly surrounded by creative product, you know, and then as that evolves, you've got, especially now, you've got, you know, new media channels, you've got new technologies, so you know, you're living and breathing it almost every day anyway, because as you walk down the street, you know, you have your iPhone, so it's all around you. Which is the cool thing about this sector, and it's constantly changing. So it's you know, if I was to do it again, I'd get right back in the sector. It's a great sector to be in. Advertising has changed over the decades, and at that time, or maybe maybe a decade later than Mad Men, you know, advertising in media, or media as it was called, you know, at the time, was the place to be, you know, and it was, you know, you're coming out of university and that's where you wanted to go work, because companies were making huge margins, 35% margins, and you know, it was a very, very well paid, it was probably one of the best paid sectors at that time. And then over the course of the next few decades, you know, in 1990s, 2000, a lot of those compensation models, as media separated from the whole creative and content side of the business, the compensation structure changed and procurement got more involved, and you know, it became a bit more challenging. And I think the whole industry has been humbled over the last 20 years, 15 to 20 years. So it's not that Mad Men era anymore, and it's more of a humble industry, if anything. You know, which, but it's a very different, it's unrecognizable from what it was. So Ciesco, we're a boutique advisory firm. We specialize in media marketing and technology. I think the biggest difference between Ciesco and some of our, you know, there's a few competitors that we have where they also specialize in this sector, very specific, rather than the generalist corporate finance advisory firms you get. We are led by partners who are practitioners from the industry. So people like me who've run businesses within media marketing, technology sectors, run large organizations and or independent companies. Rather than, you know, can we do the corporate finance engine bit? Yes, of course we can, the transactional bit. But it's really the differences, as I just described, the architecting those deals, and I think that's the big differentiator for Ciesco. We operate globally. Well, I mean, we call that out in our half-yearly reports from the activity that we saw in 2000. We tracked in 2014, where we tracked over 1,050 deals. You had the likes of the consulting firms who've shown, and we've met with most of the large consulting firms, the Capgems, Deloitte, Digitals, etc., and their interest in the marketing services place, because they come from the angle of, we have a business solution for you, and it's normally from the enterprise side. But hey, we can also deliver you, you know, what your needs are in the digital marketing area. But you know, in order to do that credibly, have they got the enterprise technology stuff? Yes. But do they have that creative and content capability? No. And that's where their interest comes into acquiring these companies from that traditional kind of, not traditional, but digital marketing niche areas like, you know, UX, design, build, etc. And then you've got the likes of, you know, other businesses that your traditional print companies who look at their heritage legacy print businesses and say we were growing at 5% and that's even declining, and so we need to get into a new area of, so print and print delivery was one thing, so maybe we can get into content, and so they made a load of acquisitions. So St. Ives, for example, 3-4 years ago started their acquisition and built up their marketing services division and kind of started offloading some of their heritage print division. They've done it successfully, but there are other companies that are print legacy businesses that were very unsuccessful in developing their marketing services offering. So there's a lot of interest in the space because you've got over $500 billion of ad spend out there, but you're always going to have the big players because you've got the big brands and they need the big players like McCann Erickson and Ogilvy, and they're quite restricted in where they can go. Oh, they're very slow. I mean, I used to have the analogy, it's like, changing the direction of a company the size of McCann is like changing the direction of an oil tanker as it's out at sea. And it does. I mean, look at, in 2005 to 2010, it took a while for the big groups to get their arms around how are they going to organize themselves for this new channel called digital. Well, it took ages. Hey, we'll acquire companies, we'll have some acqui-hires, we'll have some bolt-ons, never integrated properly, or running them parallel to your core traditional offerings. And some of those companies are still evolving with data, for example, and infusing more technology into their service offerings. So it's very difficult for the big groups, but the big groups are custodians of some of the biggest advertising budgets, and those advertising budgets, those brands will be able to use niche players in video content, for example, perhaps, but they will still need the big McCann Ericksons, the Ogilvies, to manage their global campaigns, because you need that. You need the size of those agencies for the size of the brands that they are going to manage. My role when I worked in the advertising business, managing advertising companies, was an operational role. So I managed the markets within a region. So I started in Europe, Middle East and Africa, managing the EMEA region. I went on to do Latin America and Asia and international regions. And then I moved to New York and I was managing the North American operations of Initiative Media, which was at that time the largest media company. Media and marketing is a people's industry, and if you've got a P&L of 100 million, likely you're spending 55 to 60 million on staffing. So that's the kind of percentage, and it's a people's industry. So I think the key and the most important skill is managing people, but it's a different kind of people because you've got creatives, and you've got nowadays you also have technology coders, designers. So I think managing people, number one, but being able to manage that very unique group of people called creatives. I think that's an important skill set. Well, it's a combination of things, but primarily product. You've got to have great product. You're doing great work for your clients, and nowadays, brands will want more than that because they want to know that it's measurable, that the work that you're doing is the work that's influencing the sale of their product, and they want you to demonstrate, return on whatever they're investing in terms of the capital that they're putting towards their marketing expenditure. So the world has changed, but like I said, it's a great sector and a great evolution for the sector with the changes that are happening in terms of the media channels, the technologies, and the data and how you use those technologies. Yes, absolutely, very much so. I love the sector. It's a great industry. As I said, it's always evolving. I've spent 18 years running large parts within the industry, managing large regions or operations within the industry, and now we're in the fortunate position of we're on the other side where we're advising companies, and my career here has evolved, and I've worked in different organizations within the group and sister companies and restructured a lot of businesses. But now within Ciesco, we're able to look from the outside into companies, and it's interesting because the things I used to see within a large organization like McCann, and I used to think, wow, this is unique to us. It's not. Some of these issues or operational elements that you face within these organizations, you can see within each of the 6 holding companies, if you like. So it's quite interesting seeing it from the other side. Yeah, I mean the obvious one is the Meerkats campaign is a great campaign. But if strangely, my favorite ad, TV ad, is still back from, I want to say it's late 1990s or maybe early 2000s. Is a Jeep ad, and the reason it's a favorite of mine is probably, but it wouldn't be an obvious one, but probably more because I knew the story behind the Jeep advertising was we've got to show the car, obviously, the Jeep, and we've got to show it in its environment, out in the wilderness, etc. And our creatives, the ad was created by Bozell, which was the first agency I joined into advertising. And the ad is called Snow Covered. So you've got a very open space, and there's lots of snow, very, very deep snow, and there's something, you can see there's something moving in the snow, and it's like just being ruffled, but you can't quite see what it is. And then it gets to a junction, and there's the road's been cleared, and then you just see this indicator light going, and it's Jeep, go anywhere, do anything, I think was the tagline. It's now 20 years ago, but that was, to me, it was a great ad because the client had always said you must show the car, and you couldn't see the car, but it was a great ad. I think if I can summarize, I worked in big corporate for over 18 years and enjoyed it and loved it and evolved through my career through the different 4 or 5 operating units of Interpublic, which I enjoyed very well, and then stepped into the entrepreneurial kind of somewhat worrying, somewhat nerve-wracking, on your own without the big corporate backing. But liberating, so that has been really enjoyable. But if I can summarize, I think people sometimes say to me, hey, we're going on this vacation or this holiday on this week and this month, and of course you can come. You're your own boss. Of course, you should be able to come. So what about it? My response is normally, look, it's because I'm my own boss that I can't come. It's because you can't just step out of the business, and so you don't have that infrastructure behind you. But it's enjoyable. I would encourage anyone, if they're thinking from that, from the day they leave university or and they're thinking about it, if you do your right homework and plan it properly, it's really, I would encourage it, but do it for the right reasons. Having said that, I would also encourage, I would also encourage getting some grounding in a big corporate, understanding maybe it's just understanding the industry prior to stepping out, even if eventually you want to get into that entrepreneurial world. I've always been driven and always been motivated, and your motivations are for different aspirations. So whether it's motivation just to climb that career ladder. It's more normally a motivation to get some kind of change in your working environment, because change is good. And when I say change, I mean evolving into maybe the next role. So I think everyone should aspire to do that, and that's being successful at your current job, which allows you to get on to the next role, if you like. I think that I've been lucky enough to evolve through an organisation like Interpublic and work, and even within that, evolve through different companies within that same group, building up equity within that group, amongst amongst the leadership of the group, and working with some great people throughout that journey. I guess, one of the biggest low points is where we had to make, throughout the restructuring of the North American operations, we had to make 125 people redundant, and some of those people had been in the organization for over 26, 30 years. You're able to restructure an organization which allows the rest of the organization to be profitable and flourish, which allows that organization to go ahead and do great things. Not really. I mean, you need both. You need companies and successful organizations have to constantly innovate. In terms of their service offering, in terms of their positioning, especially in a constantly changing sector, such as media marketing and tech. So they have to constantly evolve themselves. You can acquire skill sets. You can acquire capabilities. You're either acquiring for geographic or a reach or service offering, rounding out service offerings in the market that you're currently in, or core markets or in new markets. So and you can also, by the way, it's not just acquisitions, you can also do that in the form of acqui-hires, which is you're not just hiring one person to come in and organically grow a capability. You can hire a group of 4 people who are doing it well in a different company and move that. It's not quite an acquisition, and it's not really quite a just a single hire. You're bringing a team in, but it automatically gives you that service offering and that service capability. Europe is it's an interesting region. I used to say, and I still say, Europe is the largest, is the probably the most complex and difficult region to manage worldwide. Okay, in not only in marcoms or marketing communications, but I think generally the reason being, it's considerable marketing concentration in terms of ad spend and sizable Western markets there. But you could say, well, okay, but the US is also quite sizable. It is, but the US is more uniform across its different states, and there's one currency, and it's one language. And when you're doing a regional campaign for the US, it's a lot easier to manage the operations within that campaign, and you could probably centralize that quite easily, within 1 or 2 centers. When you come to Europe, you've got the Western, you've got the Central Eastern, you've got the Eastern, you've got the, then you go into, then you go EMEA, you go into Middle East and Africa, and, you've got very different cultures. So doing a regional campaign across Europe is quite difficult, and it's very fragmented. You've got core markets like the UK, Germany, Italy, Spain, France, the big markets, the big Western European markets. But even within them, there's fragmentation in terms of, what a Coca-Cola bottle may look like, and the restrictions within each of those markets. So it's much more complex from the actual global campaign side. And then when you come to managing operations within Europe, in the US, you can hire, you can fire, and it's, yes, it's a little bit more complex on the West Coast than it is on the East Coast. In Europe, it's quite easy managing your staffing levels in the UK, but when you come to countries like Netherlands and Belgium and France, the labour laws are quite restrictive, and managing operations within those markets is a lot more complex. So that's why I say, as a whole, EMEA is a tough region to manage. 2014 was a record year, and I think 2015 will still come in slightly stronger than 2014, M&A activity. And that's just a function of our industry and what's happening in that industry. There's new entrants, there's new niche requirements, and the big players constantly are wanting those requirements in-house. And so some of those businesses that have somewhat developed are ready for a transaction, and if it's not the second half of this year, it'll be H1 next year. Yeah, I mean, there's no guaranteed great results without failing. At the end of the day, it's driven by product, and you've got to have a great product, a solution to a problem, something to offer to the marketplace. Look, the strategy is, there's no rocket science in strategy normally, okay? Yes, you can have a great idea, and then you can follow that idea through. But strategy is one thing. What's key, and I've said this over the 25 years I've worked throughout my career, what's key is execution. And so you can have a great idea and never follow it up. Well, that's just not execution. You can have a great idea and follow it up quite badly, and that again is poor execution. So it's having that great idea, whether it's in a corporate and having an expansion program for the Middle East, for example. Okay, you can have, hey, we want to get into, start with the core markets, work through where our clients are, and then expand. That's a great strategy. Okay, people fail. Why? Because of the execution. It's the execution that's bad. So whether you're a startup or a big corporation, the strategy for most of the big holding companies, WPP, Omnicom, Publicis, Havas, Dentsu, if you looked at it 6-7 years ago, it was all the same. It was, hey, brick markets are important for us. Let's get in there. Let's grow where our clients are, and plus then let's infuse digital through the organization. It's a new channel, probably a bit more than that. But some failed, or didn't do as well as some of the others, and execution. So it's, yes, you and that applies to a startup. You can have a great idea, but it's about the execution. Next month, you may have the beginning of the new Facebook, and you may have the decline of the current Facebook. You're constantly going to get new technology platforms, and you'll get new technology platforms on new technology platforms and new media channels. So that's what's great about this sector. It's constantly evolving, and you'll find new ways of creating content, and with new content, you'll have new ways of distributing that content. Consumers will find new ways of looking at that content, because you used to look at a TV ad on television, and now you'll look at a video on your phone. So there's so many different and moving pieces. There's the distribution, the chat, the what you're viewing it on, the actual content that you're viewing, and all of those things. It's multi-dimensional, so it will constantly evolve. Look, I mean, at 23, I think I had ideas about what I wanted to do, but your career can follow different paths, and as you develop from 23 to towards 30, I think you crystallize some of those thoughts, unless you've got a specific, you're doing a law degree or you're in med school, etc. Some people at that point are still finding their feet as to where they want to end up, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I started in the oil industry, spent a couple of years there, did the music industry with the EMI, and a couple of years there, which I really didn't enjoy that much. And then I got into advertising, and I was 27 years old. I got thrown in at the deep end, and this is exactly what my boss said to me, sitting in the piazza in Covent Garden over a bottle of wine, and suddenly we're having a career conversation and me moving to Brussels. And I was like, wow, and I switched my drink from the wine to the water, as he's telling me all this. And, at that point, I'd never been to Brussels. So, you take a chance somewhat, but it's important to have a good mentor who within the organization, who can provide some guidance. But you're not necessarily going to know at 23 what it is you want to do. It's good to have a good idea because you have then an anchor point. But if you end up completely going in a different direction, if those opportunities come up, take them.